They, excuse me, I believe you have my stapler.
The movie Office Space was an awesome movie. It's funny, it's a bit dark, but the reason why it was so successful is just because it resonates. At one point, Peter, the main protagonist, says,
"The thing is, Bob, it's not that I'm lazy. It's that I just don't care."
Don't care?
Let's talk about employee disengagement and the four beliefs that keep most companies stuck with management practices that emerged during the Industrial Revolution. If you are the CEO of a US company in 2018, according to Gallup, less than 40% of your employees are engaged. So if your company had 10 people, it would look like this. 3 are actively engaged. They love their job and are moving the company forward. 5 are disengaged. They don't really care where the company is going. They just go through their day and try to stay out of trouble. And 2 actually hate their job. And it's not just that they're doing nothing. They're actively undermining the efforts of everyone else, and especially the engaged ones. Now, if you're the CEO of a company in Europe, the picture is actually way more depressing. Out of 10 people, only 1 is engaged. 7 are disengaged, and 2 are actively disengaged. The core of the problem is that most companies still operate with management practices that were developed during the Industrial Revolution, even though our understanding of human motivation and performance has grown tremendously since then. We are essentially running 2019 companies with operating systems imagined in the 1920s. And the fact that the business literature is dominated by articles and books that mostly talk about how to navigate the existing corporate landscape doesn't help. It creates the illusion that the best we can do is to keep on tweaking and optimizing management systems developed in the 19th century, when we should instead be designing new ones. High employee engagement and performance is not an accident. It doesn't happen by luck. It's designed and it starts with the CEO. The research on human motivation has produced some of the most robust findings in psychology. We perform at our best when we are intrinsically motivated, which is the result of being able to satisfy 3 fundamental psychological needs. Namely, autonomy, which is the desire to experience a sense of choice and psychological freedom when carrying out an activity. Competence, which is the desire to feel effective and competent in whatever it is that we're doing. And relatedness, which is the desire to feel connected to others, to care and be cared for, to feel like we belong to whatever group is important to us. Those insights are the result of decades of research by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, 2 of the leading experts in the field of human motivation and performance. And it's not just old theory. Some organizations have shown how it can be done in practice. I'm not talking about the sexy tech companies we usually hear about in the news because they offer free food and beanbags and nap rooms and ping pong tables. Those are great, but they're just gimmicks. I'm talking about the organizations that have ditched some traditional management practices and developed their own operating systems. Look at Favi, for example. Favi is a pressure die casting company in France. Its CEO, Jean-François Zobrist, believes that performance comes from operators and only from them, and that there is no performance without happiness. Zobrist has completely transformed Favi's management practices, and for the last 25 years, this company has enjoyed incredibly high levels of employee engagement and performance. They are now the only company of their kind left in Europe. They generate good margins and are so price competitive that they even export to China. Other successful companies have also developed their own operating systems in many different industries and geographies, from healthcare in the Netherlands to financial services in the US, engineering in Brazil, and even in public organizations in Belgium or the US military. How they've achieved such success is not a secret, since they talk about it. For example, David Marquette, the former captain of the USS Santa Fe, the nuclear submarine, or Ricardo Semler, the former CEO of Semco, or Laurence Vanet, the former head of HR for the Belgian Ministry of Social Security. And even when they're not doing it themselves, other people are. In books like Freedom Inc. from Isaac Getz and Brian Carney, Reinventing Organizations from Frédéric Laloux, or Drive from Dan Pink. If you want even more examples, check out Gallup's Great Workplace Awards list. These organizations have nearly 7 times the US engagement rate and more than 15 times the global rate. So if someone wants to look for knowledge and inspiration for how to build better organizations, there is plenty of material out there. So why are there still so many organizations stuck with outdated management practices and massive disengagement problems? One way to answer the question is to look at how those outliers have done it. Is there some secret sauce? Something so unique about them that others can't replicate? Not really. What they've done is pretty straightforward and full of common sense. It's also consistent with the science, whether it's on purpose or accidentally. Again, what does the science say? High performance is found in environments that provide ample opportunities for employees to fulfill their most fundamental psychological needs for autonomy, competence, and relatedness. There are 2 things, however, that all those outliers have in common. The first one is that everything started at the very top with the CEO. And the second is that they didn't merely tweak or improve on traditional management practices, they designed their own. Those CEOs have gone on a journey to re-examine many of the assumptions that underpin the management practices developed in the 19th century. And from there, iteratively redesigned a set of operating principles and leadership practices uniquely suited for their organization. Here is a small sample of the kind of practices those companies have implemented. Self-organizing teams, no managers. Performance targets set by teams themselves instead of being given to them. No individual performance assessment, only team performance is tracked. Salaries set directly by employees. Bottom-up budgeting instead of top-down, or even no budget at all. Employees decide when, with who, and from where they work. It kinda sounds crazy, right? They only look crazy when compared with how most companies operate. But when we look at them through the lens of current scientific knowledge about human motivation and performance, they actually make a lot of sense. Okay, so back at the question, what prevents others from starting their own transformation and getting the same results? It's the fact that many of the beliefs that we usually hold about human motivation and performance are wrong. In fact, there are 4 core beliefs that we need to re-examine if we are committed to building better, more effective, and more productive organizations. We can motivate people, meaning that we can employ a set of tactics such as reward and punishment to boost employees' performance and channel their energy into the goals of the organization. The reality is that motivation is not something that we can do to people. People are already motivated. We can't make them care. We can only create the conditions where they freely decide to care about the goals of the company. The implication here is that we need to understand to what extent their job and current work environment contribute to fueling their intrinsic motivation. How much autonomy do they have in deciding what they do and how they do it? Are they exposed to interesting challenges? Do they see the impact of their work? Do they have opportunities to grow? Do they feel connected to their team? Are they in a supportive environment? Do they understand and connect with the vision and mission of the company? Most people are type X, meaning that if left to their own devices, they would avoid effort, they wouldn't take responsibility, they wouldn't be proactive, and therefore they would need to be controlled. The reality is that work is just as natural to all of us as play or rest. Given the right environment, most people are actually type Y. They are internally motivated, they can enjoy their job, and when they commit to a goal, they will seek responsibility and work to better themselves without a direct reward in return. The implication here is that we're better off assuming that 95% of the people are type Y and design our organization with them in mind, not for the 5%. Don't sabotage the whole for the sake of a few bad apples. avoid the rules and constraints that turn responsible adults into rebellious children. As for the 5% who actually are type X and want to be controlled, well, they won't be happy in that environment. They will self-select out. Just make it easy for them to make that decision. When people do bad stuff, it's mostly because of their personality. This is also known as the fundamental attribution error. But the reality is that the causes of disengagement are more often found in the environment rather than in employees' innate personality traits. The implication here is that when we believe that people are the problem, we'll focus on solutions that aim to fix the people. For example, training programs, or performance improvement plans, or financial incentives. Or we will resort to just get rid of them and find better people. While those might be the right things to do in some instances, they are widely ineffective if the problem is not inside people's head, but instead is structurally present in the environment. When we observe patterns of bad behavior, we should look at how the organization or the leadership promotes those behavior. For example, look at how a stacked ranking for performance evaluation creates an internal competition between members of the same team, and an incentive to spend time managing perception and playing political games. Organizations are simple systems, meaning that with the right kind of structure and control mechanisms, an organization can be managed and controlled centrally. The reality is that organizations are more like a city or a brain. They are complex systems. And one of the distinct properties of complex systems, among other things, is spontaneous order, also called self-organization, not central control. The implication here is that any attempt to centrally control a complex system requires a control system at least as complex, which explains why management structures tend to bloat as organizations grow in size and complexity. This one is a long one, and we'll talk about the problems of command and control in a different video. In a nutshell, we should strive to push the authority where the information is, meaning decentralized decision making, instead of trying to pool information where the authority is. The problem with all of that is that updating a belief is not that easy, no matter how convincing the science is. Transferring a new idea onto a blank slate, for example, teaching math to kids in school, is pretty straightforward. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's straightforward. However, replacing an existing idea with a new one is a completely different ballgame. It can be incredibly difficult to let go of an existing belief. Not only because we may have a strong emotional attachment to it, but also because we've made decisions with real-life implications on the basis of holding that belief, and we may feel committed to those decisions. It applies here because even if we now know that many of the beliefs that we usually hold about human motivation and performance are wrong, most companies we've worked at use organizational structures, management practices, incentive system, company policies that are a legacy of the Industrial Revolution, when our assumptions about how humans work were very different. And the fact that we've used those systems for years apply a considerable amount of pressure to keep our existing beliefs in place. On top of that, since the business literature is dominated by articles and books that talk about how to navigate the existing systems instead of how to outgrow them, our mental models and assumptions generally go unchallenged. They feel like bedrock truth. As a result, when we first engage with the research on human motivation, it may strike us as counterintuitive, scary, or even offensive. And when we observe how those outliers operate, it may leave us quite puzzled, as if we're looking at a river flowing upward. And here's where things get even more challenging. Because even if we're able to update our mental models, we may still struggle to do anything about it. That's when our ego gets in the way. As much as the gap between ignorance and knowledge can be hard to cross, the gap between knowledge and action can be even wider, especially when we feel like we're taking a personal risk. In his book, Turn the Ship Around, former US Navy Captain David Marquette often talks about the risk he took by experimenting with completely new management practices and leadership style. He wasn't sure it was going to work. This could have well been the end of his career in the Navy. But instead, his risk paid off. The USS Santa Fe went in less than a year from the worst submarine in the Navy to the best. As long as management practices aligned with the science of motivation and performance aren't mainstream, it is going to be a personal risk for a CEO to deviate from traditional management playbook. In fact, going down that path means fundamentally rethinking our role as CEOs. Ilka is the CEO of Supercell, and he says that he wants to be the least powerful CEO. But his commitment to this leadership style only emerged after reflecting on the mistakes that he made during his first experience as a CEO. At that time, he tried to create a perfect hyper-control organization and learned the hard way that concentration of power does not lead to high-performing teams and companies. At GDC in 2018, he talked about the misconceptions he had and the mistakes that he made, and how he turned each mistake into a valuable negative insight, and how he used all of those insights to design Supercell's unique operating principles. Applying the teaching of research on human motivation and performance also means re-examining and redefining our relationship with fundamental concepts such as control, power, or status. David Marquette, again, admits that it feels good to be powerful.
I have control issues. I like to take control. I like to give orders. I like it when people follow them. And you know, every day as I strive to be a leader in service to others, I struggle against that instinct because this is what I learned. To be a leader in service to others, we need to give control, not take control.
It is part of our nature. We like being important. We want to be in control. We like making decisions. Those instincts are inherent to our nature as social primates. But they are also the ones that we need to outgrow if we want to build better, more effective, and more productive organizations. Reinventing ourselves is not easy. But as Ed Catmull, the CEO of Pixar, would say, easy is not the goal. Creating a great company is. As we're reaching the end of this video, you might be left unsatisfied since I'm not offering much by way of solutions. There are a couple of reasons for that. First, I don't want this video to turn into a 2-hour documentary. In other videos, we will get into more specific questions and concepts such as the hidden cost of performance evaluation, or what are the alternatives to top-down strategy setting. But more importantly, while there are some universal principles that any operating system needs to incorporate, there is just no universal recipe. Every organization has a unique mix of people, culture, circumstances, goals, and constraints. Each organization needs to find a system that works for them. Also, and this is going to sound cliche, but it's fundamental, the journey, meaning iteratively designing a system that works for a company, is just as important as the destination, meaning having a system. We can't just walk into another company like Favi and copy-paste their current model and management practices. It just wouldn't work. You, the CEO, are the one who can open the door to transform your company. But everyone in your organization needs to walk through that door with you.